Good morning, and thank you for joining us today, especially members of the media who are with us here in person as well as online. Stand With Us is also grateful to the many partner organizations who are sponsoring today's event. I'm Carly Gamble, founding director of the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. I am joined here today by a group of individuals who, like myself, are beyond appalled at the kangaroo court that is the United Nations Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry on Israel. After everyone has spoken, we will have time for questions. This Commission of Inquiry epitomizes the definition of anti-Semitism, claiming to seek the underlying causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Instead, what it does is it applies a double standard to the state of Israel. The Commission's latest report blames Israel alone for the conflict. Astoundingly, it fails to mention Hamas or even the word terrorism a single time. It is no wonder that the governments of multiple countries have condemned this Commission of Inquiry. And we are grateful that just yesterday, President Biden reaffirmed the United States' own position of strong opposition to the open-ended and biased nature of the Commission of Inquiry. I am sure that our esteemed speakers today will address many egregious examples of the anti-Israel bias and the glaring flaws of the Commission's report. Among those is a truly outrageous and absurd claim that clearly demonstrates, for any fair-minded and critical thinker, the agenda of the Commission to dehumanize Israelis and to demonize Israel in the eyes of the world. This commission, the members of which have a documented history of anti-Israel bias and even outright anti-Semitism, has somehow determined that Israel is even responsible for the violence that Palestinian men choose to perpetrate against Palestinian women. Do Navi Pillay and her fellow commissioners also blame the honor killings and the second-class citizenship of Palestinian women on Israelis? And why stop there? By the Commission's logic, it would also need to blame Israel for these same tragic conditions in other Middle East countries, like Saudi Arabia and Iran. Unfortunately, while real and egregious human rights violations like these and others are occurring around the world, the UN Human Rights Council is abusing its power by ignoring those violations and by wasting valuable resources in its myopic and obsessive attempts to slander Israel. The fabricated claims of this Commission of Inquiry are merely the latest in the systemic discrimination of the UN Human Rights Council against Israel. Today, we are handing a petition to Ambassador Gilad Erdan, a man who has served the state of Israel with distinction for many years and who now represents the interests of Israel at the United Nations. This petition is signed by over 10,000 people who are disgusted with the Commission of Inquiry, who reject its legitimacy and its, quote, findings, and who are standing up for Israel, for human rights, and for peace. Ambassador Erdan will be responding later today to Navi Pillay's report to the General Assembly. Additionally, Professor Ann Bayevsky of Human Rights Voices will be handing Ambassador Erdan evidence of hundreds of thousands of individual submissions to the Commission of Inquiry from Israeli victims of Palestinian terrorism, from suicide bombings and sniper assaults, to car rammings and knife attacks, airplane hijackings, and massacres like Ma'alot, the Munich Olympics, and even Hebron, all of whose voices the Commission of Inquiry has completely ignored. Ambassador, please refer, Thank you, Ambassador, please refer to our petition when you respond to Navi Pillay. Tell Navi Pillay, her fellow commissioners, and the UN General Assembly that there are people around the world who are outraged by this Commission of Inquiry, its kangaroo court, and its modern-day anti-Semitism. Ambassador.
Good morning. Dear friends, for as long as the Jewish people existed, we have been hated with an incomparable passion. We have endured exiles, crusades, inquisitions, pogroms, and of course, the Holocaust. The anti-Semites always blamed the Jews for all of the world's evils. Today, it's no longer politically correct to openly blame the Jews for all of the world's problems, so anti-Semitism adopted. Rather than burning the Jew at the stake, anti-Semites burned the Jewish state at the stake. And this is exactly what the institution behind us constantly does. In less than an hour, the UN will once again be weaponized against Israel. Last May, the morally bankrupt Human Rights Council, ruled by a junta of totalitarian dictatorships, once again chose to expend its time and efforts on investigating the most vibrant liberal democracy in the Middle East. And this isn't the first time. 30% of all COIs established by the Human Rights Council targeted Israel. This is a council that has condemned Israel, a liberal democracy, more times than Syria, Iran, and North Korea combined. This biased body would rather obsess over Israel than tackle any of the true human rights abuses around the world. So, while thousands of rockets rained down on Israel, fired indiscriminately by Hamas, a designated terror organization, the Council schemed to once again focus the UN's resources on attacking Israel, rather than on the terrorists who use their own citizens as human shields. And do you know which countries voted in favor of establishing this commission? Libya, Somalia, Venezuela, Russia, China, and the list goes on. These are the countries that support investigating free liberal democracies. Do you know which countries opposed? Yesterday, we heard President Biden express strong condemnation against the COI and the damage it causes. But aside from the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, Austria, and many more robust democracies spoke out against this clear bias. When it comes to human rights, who has more credibility? The Council is a mockery, just like this pathetic commission is a mockery. Yet merely establishing another UN-sponsored inquisition against Israel wasn't enough. The one and only goal of this commission was to demonize Israel. And how better to demonize Israel than to find commissioners that would ensure exactly that outcome? The members of the COI were not chosen for their investigative skills. They were chosen specifically because of their very public hatred of Israel and their very poisonous anti-Semitism. We've all heard their venomous statements. Such Jew hatred has no place in any workplace, let alone in an institution such as the UN. The Human Rights Council has long lost any semblance of legitimacy. The decision to establish this commission had no semblance of legitimacy, and therefore the report presented today lacks any legitimacy. Dear friends, when faced with hypocrisy and lies, we should always stand up and delegitimize our delegitimizers, and that's precisely what I will do today at the UN. I will expose these commissioners for what they are: pure anti-Semites, pure Israel haters. But friends, when I stand before the commissioners today and show the world the truth, I know that I am not standing there alone. I am standing alongside the thousands and thousands of citizens that signed this petition denouncing the distortion and hate of the Human Rights Council. I will take this petition to the Secretary General and share it with my fellow ambassadors. Your voices are heard loud and clear, but it's my responsibility to amplify them on the world stage, and that is precisely what I will do. Am Yisrael Chai, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the moral clarity that you will show today. Next, I would like to introduce a scholar and an activist who is an expert in the international human rights arena. It's my pleasure to welcome the director of the Touro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust and president of Human Rights Voices, Professor Ann Bayevsky.
In 45 minutes, the United Nations will spread modern anti-Semitism worldwide. To all those who claim to care about Kanye West espousing anti-Semitism, especially in view of his power to influence others, this morning the United Nations is testing your commitment. Anti-Semitism at the UN sadly dwarfs West in its breadth, its resources, and its global reach. The words of the members of this inquiry against Israel will be translated simultaneously into 6 languages, broadcast around the world on UN Web TV, and made permanently available on the UN website. And yet, their message will be one of hate, of intolerance, and the demonization of the world's one Jewish state and its people. We know this in advance because the inquiry was created by a so-called Human Rights Council, whose members include the likes of China, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Venezuela. Not one Western democracy voted in favor. Its scope and resources are grossly discriminatory. And we know the players. Each of them had declared Israel guilty of the very crimes they were charged with investigating before they began. Over the past 4 months, one ridiculed accusations of anti-Semitism, one said the Jewish lobby controlled social media, and Chair Nave Pillay unapologetically defended them both. We also know how they have conducted the inquiry, calling for submissions on victims of systematic discrimination and repression and underlying root causes of the Israeli-Palestinian-Arab conflict, with no start or no end date, and then sending the submissions that challenge the prearranged endgame directly to trash. In an unprecedented response in the history of the UN human rights system, the Touro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust and Human Rights Voices, and a group of eminent research centers and organizations submitted over 5 million unique submissions. The names and death sites of Jewish victims of systematic discrimination and repression during the Holocaust, and the role played by Nazi collaborator and propagandist, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini, and his malign influence to this day. The names, origins, and dates of arrival in Israel of hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees that were victims of Arab persecution in Middle East and North African nations. The names of thousands of civilians in Israel ruthlessly killed by unremitting Arab violence from the beginning of modern Zionism until this year. The names of over 24,000 Israeli military and security forces who have fallen in defense of their country and its inhabitants. An account of all the wars and defensive military operations Israel has been forced to fight since 1948, and the thousands of attacks by Palestinians and collaborators in the 21st century alone. And almost 50,000 submissions containing video and photographic evidence, weekly situation reports, legal documentation and analysis, meticulously demonstrating Palestinian Arab anti-Semitism and remorseless violence directed at Israelis over the past 75 years. Mr. Ambassador, here's a copy of all those submissions. Each one logged and sent to the UN over a 7-month period, electronically and ultimately by hard drive. And yet, Pillay openly told the press in June she hadn't seen them and dismiss them as all pro-Israel. In today's report, there are dozens of references to non-UN organizations. Every one of them trash talks Israel. Not one participating so-called pro-Israel NGO sees the light of day. And so we know this UN inquiry is a sham, a dangerous con. It bills itself as discerning all underlying root causes of the conflict, and yet it announces it is only about, and I'm quoting them, the human rights implications for Palestinians. This is modern anti-Semitism, erasing the human rights of Jews. Let us join together in condemning it and ensuring the American taxpayer stops paying its bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for ensuring that those voices of those victims will be heard. As you have heard, one of the glaring errors of the Commission of Inquiry's report is the complete absence of any mention of Palestinian terror attacks in Israel, which have been numerous and have devastated the lives of thousands. We are now going to hear from Shani and Asaf Avigal, parents whose 5-year-old son was murdered in their home by a rocket launched by Hamas in May of 2021.
Have you ever broken a promise that you made to your child? Every parent probably experiences this once in a while. Have you ever had to bury your own child because you didn't keep your promise? In my case, that's exactly what happened. Do any of you have children? Then you understand that the desire to protect your kids is the most fundamental right you have, which can be even more important than your own life. Imagine when you can't do this, even in your own home, the place which is supposed to be the safest of all. My name is Asaf, I'm 36 from Israel, and until the mid of May 2021, I led a normal life. I'm an engineer, working in the tech industry for almost a decade, and more importantly, I was happily married with 2 wonderful kids. Since becoming a parent, I've had a couple of goals, like we all have. Raising my kids peacefully, giving them all the tools to achieve their goals and dreams, and of course, protecting them. I would say that those are probably the most common wishes of every parent on earth, or at least that's what I thought. Unfortunately, this assumption was wrong, totally wrong. This is because we live in a world where terror organizations like Hamas blatantly use children as human shields, with the main goal of killing innocents, including kids. In the building behind us, a report written by individuals who claim to protect human rights will be shortly presented. But apparently, not the rights of all humans are represented there. I saw the 28-page report issued by the Commission of Inquiry. However, I did not read it. Upon receiving the report, conducted a quick analysis by creating a diagram of the most frequently used words in the report. Guess what? The word Israel and its various combinations stand out as the most commonly used words in the report. In some aspects, this is no surprise, as Israeli citizens are continually victimized by terrorist organizations. However, I was astounded to discover that words such as terror, Hamas, rocket, and missile were absent, not a single mention. How is this possible? Would you bother to read such a report that is biased, a report that doesn't reflect reality? When dealing with terror, we all have to speak out against it. My son was not killed by accident. He was the target of terror groups focused on relentlessly developing deadly and abhorrent weapons and methods of murders. A day before my son was killed, or to be more accurate, was murdered by Hamas, he was terrified of the endless sirens and rockets that were fired toward us. He asked me, "Daddy, what would happen if you couldn't get to a shelter on time when the rockets come?" I answered, "As long as you are with me, you are safe." And that was the broken promise I made to my child. My greatest wish is that you will be able to protect your kids and families.
name is Shani Avigal. I am the mother of Ido Avigal, my 5-year-old son, who was murdered by the terror organization Hamas during the Guardian of the Walls operation almost 1.5 years ago. Ido was killed by a rocket when he was lying on bed in the safe room. Let me explain what a safe room is. We all imagine our home as a safe place for our family, but in Israel, a home needs a special room built to protect it during a rocket or gas attack. We have only seconds to reach a safe area when there is a siren. At 7:17 p.m., Ido approached me on the balcony with a question about his dinosaur game. By 7:19 p.m., we heard a siren alarm, notifying us that rockets from Gaza were coming. This was the last siren for Ido. Imagine you are home in your own city with your family and you hear a siren. Imagine the fear that you have for the safety of your children. Attacking civilian areas is a crime against humanity. Ido sat next to me in the safe room. He put his head under my arm since the boom scared him. There were 8 family members in the safe room: my daughter, my 3 nephews, my sister and her husband, Ido, and myself. A highly advanced rocket hit the building next to us. I'm sorry. Shrapnel flew directly into our building and penetrated the safe room's Armand window. The whole thing happened in a matter of milliseconds. This next part might be hard to listen to, but I want you to really understand what happened to me and my family. I want you to understand what the terrorism succeeded in doing. Ido was hit in the head, chest, and belly. I was in shock, woken by my sister's screams as she saw her 6-year-old son covered with blood. I was severely injured. Shrapnel injured my daughter Tahel's eye, and my nephews were also severely injured. My injuries caused by shrapnels in the chest. One of them hit the main artery, and another, larger, hit my shoulder. While wounded and covered with blood, I begged for help and tried to save my little boy. I picked him up, stepping on burning shards and broken glass from the exploded windows, and ran to the neighbors. They didn't hear me from their safe room as Hamas continued to fire rockets. About to lose consciousness, I sat down and called the police, saying, "My son and I are dying. Please hurry." My brother-in-law placed a towel on my chest in an attempt to stop the bleeding. I took it off to cover Ido's belly, which was open with all his internal organs exposed. Right after that, I lost consciousness. I woke up just long enough to hear the paramedic instructing my neighbor through the phone so he could perform CPR on my son, and then lost consciousness again. I was in a coma for a few days. During that time, my husband had to tell my daughter that her little brother was murdered. In Gaza, on the other hand, candy was handed out in celebration of the death of my son, celebrating a death of a 5-year-old boy. Candy was also distributed by the same terror organization immediately after the tragic 9/11 terror attacks. I wasn't able to attend my own son's funeral as I was in a coma. To murder a little boy wasn't enough for Hamas. They weren't willing to let us bury him in peace. During the funeral, they deliberately fired rockets at the attendees who had come to pay their last respect to my son, Ido. To murder an innocent child who did no wrong and then try to murder his family, mourning his loss while burying him, is an act that even the word vile cannot describe accurately. An inhuman act. It is a crime against humanity. Ido was murdered, and we will all injured. To this day, we all still suffer physically and mentally. Even though the large scar on my throat is clearly visible, my larger scar is hidden. This is the scar who keeps me up at night, triggers flashbacks of me holding my dead son's body, and causes me to hear screams in the middle of the day. While our defense force tries to avoid harming innocent, especially children, it has been a long-time practice of Hamas to intentionally target children and families in their homes. This is a crime against humanity. For many children, growing up in Israel means living in fear. Around the world, balloons are always associated with birthdays, joy, and celebration. However, in Israel, when a child sees a balloon, he immediately alerts his parents, who may call the police. Israeli children at very young ages know that balloons could be bombs because Hamas regularly sends balloons containing bombs to Israel. In the month following the end of 2021 Guardian of the Walls operation, my sister took my daughter for a breakfast at a coffee shop. A siren went off while they were eating. Many children were shouting, crying, and panicking when rockets exploded over them. Kids who just wanted an outdoor fun experience with their parents. An 8-year-old girl, my daughter, grieving over the loss of her beloved and only brother, desperate to reach a shelter for self-defense. This is our routine. When we take our kids to a dancing class or a picnic in the park, we know that we have to be prepared. Rockets from Gaza may be fired at any time. While our parks are green like Central Park, there is one noticeable difference. Where trees should be, concrete bomb shelters are placed all over the lawns, destroying the peace and nature. Shooting us doesn't require a high-profile operation like the Guardian of the Walls. They shoot all the time, whenever they feel like it. It has a profound effect on the children in the city I lived in, which is located less than 1 mile from the border with Gaza. More than 20% of those kids are undergo weekly psychological therapy to cope. So did my kids. You will not hear about it on the news unless our defense force responds. In some cases, Hamas even fire machine guns directly into our homes in the middle of the night when kids and their parents are sound asleep in their beds. In Israel, being a child means being constantly terrified that you will be killed just for being Israeli. As a result, children in Israel are often afraid to sleep alone and wet their beds. It also means that you may have to run into a safe room during dinner just because Hamas decided to fire rockets as a sign of identification with terrorists who had just randomly stabbed innocent people in Tel Aviv. Why are no inquiry committees formed to investigate and condemn those acts? And why don't you hear about it on the news? A few years ago, when a siren went off, Ido asked me, "Mommy, why are they trying to kill me? I didn't do them anything wrong." I often overhear my daughter and nephews discussing the explosion, the blood, and the trauma that followed Ido's death that evening. Hearing an adult talk about it is difficult enough. Hearing a children speak about it, it's unimaginable. I lost my son to Hamas terrorism, but unfortunately, I am not the only mother who has lost her child to a terror organization. My daughter is frightened by every little noise she hears. Tragically, she is not the only Israeli child living in fear. Ido was a bright and funny kid with a deep soul and a captivating smile. Ido celebrated Purim, our equivalent to Halloween, all year long. Costumes were his favorite game, and he cleverly invented unique rules for each costume while playing with his friends. As a child, he dreamed of becoming an astronaut and even meeting aliens. The thought of seeing him grow up was exciting for me as a mother. Now, I will keep wondering. I did not send my son to die a murderous death, but protected his life as much as I could. I did not dance a dance of joy when he died, but crying my soul out as the pain pierces my heart. My son was not a shaheed. He didn't know what hate was. He wasn't a soldier, but only a 5-year-old boy defending himself with his small bare hands. In memory of my son, Ido Avigal, may he rest in peace.
Shani and Asaf, thank you for demonstrating courage in the face of such an unimaginable loss. Next, we will hear from a leader in the fight to combat anti-Semitism, including the assault on Israel's legitimacy. CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, William Daroff.
Thank you very much. That was so meaningful, and may Ido's spirit bless us and have some influence over this United Nations body behind us. We stand here today in front of the international organization that helped to bring about the modern state of Israel, to bemoan just how far it has fallen. Israel turns 75 this coming May, and in those 3/4 of a century, the United Nations consistently has sought to demean, demonize, and delegitimize the world's only Jewish state. The latest effort, like many before it, emanates from the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Since its establishment in 2006, the Human Rights Council has held 31 special sessions, of which 9 were dedicated to Israel. Indeed, no other country has been subjected to such scrutiny and systematic bias by the United Nations Human Rights organ. Last year, when the Human Rights Council established this commission on inquiry, solely focused on investigating Israel, and an exceptional exception and departure from past practice, it charged the commission with investigating the situation inside Israel as well as outside it. The HRC established this investigative body with no end date, no limitation in scope, and a disproportionate budget to investigate Israel. The scope and nature of the COI are unprecedented and demonstrate a clear bias. The commissioners of the COI have a long history of anti-Israel bias, which has prejudiced the supposedly objective work and standards of the COI, and they continue to demonstrate this bias with the blatantly anti-Semitic statements to the media over the past few months. As the COI prepares to present its last prejudicial findings to the United Nations, free of essential facts and devoid of context, devoid of any mention of Ido and the hundreds of other Idos, thousands of other Idos who have been victims of terror, we urge the nations of the world to condemn the Commission of Inquiry's one-sided report and to support efforts to disband this malicious and illegitimate body. Thank you.
Thank you, William, for highlighting further the overlooking of so many important matters by the Commission of Inquiry. Speaking next, an ardent supporter of Israel and its right to defend its citizens, President and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, Eric Fingerhut.
Thank you. Thank you, Stand With Us, for organizing this important conference today. May the memory of Ido be a blessing to all forever. May his parents be comfort among all the mourners of Zion and the world. It's my great privilege And it's my responsibility to stand here today to represent the 146 Jewish federations across North America and the well over 200 smaller, organized, independent, networked Jewish communities across North America, all of whom are dedicated to the business of building flourishing Jewish life, healthy, safe, caring, welcoming, and inclusive communities, and all of whom stand with the state of Israel always, today at the UN and in every place in the world where Israel needs our support and our voice. We are, of course, living in a time of rising hate across the world and certainly across North America. This hate is not random. It is the result of organized action. And unfortunately, a center of that organized action is here at the United Nations Human Rights Council and will be exemplified today by this Commission of Inquiry report. It is efforts like this to demonize Israel that are spreading hatred and anti-Semitism and are the direct cause of the hatred and violence that we are seeing around the world. And that's why we are so proud of Ambassador Erdan, who will stand up today and give voice to this sham and this travesty that is being brought at the United Nations today, representing us. And it's why we will all stand here in front of this United Nations building to expose the lies and to oppose the hatred. And we appeal to all of our partners in civil society, to other faith organizations, to the business community, to governments, all of whom have a responsibility to join together with the real voices of human rights in opposing hatred and violence, and to spread the clear understanding that what is being done today at the United Nations is nothing but lies and the spreading of violence and hatred in our communities. We stand together in opposing this terrible report.
Thank you, Eric. It's now my privilege to introduce a survivor of a Palestinian bus bombing terror attack in Israel, an experience that has resulted in her advocating for and helping to provide for the needs of victims of terrorism around the world. Founder and director of the nonprofit organization Strength to Strength, Sari Singer.
Good morning. My name is Sari Singer, and I'm the daughter of New Jersey State Senator Robert Singer, and I'm also the founder of Strength to Strength, an organization which brings victims of terrorism together from around the world to help them heal and move forward with their lives. I'm also an American who is a victim of a Palestinian terrorist attack in Israel on bus number 14 on June 11, 2003, where over 100 of us were injured and 17 innocent people were murdered, including everyone seated and standing around me. It was a day that changed my life forever. The bus 14 bombing is one of hundreds of terror attacks Hamas had committed in and around Israel. It is 19 years since that attack, and I'm still witnessing the lifelong wounds and trauma that thousands and thousands of people in Israel continue to experience as a result of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Palestinian Authority, promoting hate and murder on an ongoing basis. The 18-year-old Palestinian suicide bomber, who had been indoctrinated and radicalized by Hamas, had one goal in mind: to hurt and murder innocent Israeli civilians. And he succeeded that goal. When I close my eyes, I'm brought back to the events of that day, which are still fresh in my mind. I remember boarding the bus that was very crowded and seeing 2 empty seats. But instead of taking the aisle seat, which I normally would have took, I moved next to the window, a choice that I now know saved my life. I remember the sounds of crushing metal and feeling the shock wave as the explosion tore through the bus. I remember immediately shutting my eyes, an instinct that saved my sight. And then the moment of eerie silence, the silence that followed the blast, a silence so frightening, silence of those that were dead in every seat around me. Then I screamed so loud that a stranger who had heard the blast from 3 blocks away heard my cries and ran towards the burning, mangled bus and pulled me out. I will never forget the old Israeli woman who stood by my side holding me as I was burned, bleeding, and frightened. I will never forget the kindness of those that I had shown me my whole life and those that I had never met before. Today I stand before you, still carrying the memories of that horrific day. I have pieces of shrapnel embedded in me in locations that are inoperable. The Hamas terrorist was the 8th Palestinian homicide bomber to be recruited by Hamas from a children's Palestinian soccer team for the sole purpose of carrying out attacks in Israel on innocent civilians. It seems obvious that victims of terror and their families deserve to be heard by the largest and most well-funded human rights organization in the world, the UN Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is an oxymoron, an abuse of its impressive name. It ignores the voices of victims while obsessively and relentlessly attacking the world's only Jewish state. We must understand the root cause of Palestinian terror. The Palestinian education system systematically guides and indoctrinates its children, just like they did to the 18-year-old Palestinian who boarded my bus that day and carried out one of Israel's largest suicide bombings. They teach their children the importance of hate and murder of Israelis, not peaceful coexistence. Once again, deflecting blame to Israel will not reduce any violence or terror. On the contrary, it encourages it by ignoring and excusing the promotion of hate, violence, and murder. Where is the Commission of Inquiry on why Israel must defend its citizens from terror attacks against Hamas on a daily basis? Where is the Commission of Inquiry on the dangerous Palestinian education and constant acts of terrorism? In essence, everything that the Human Rights Council is doing right now not only excuses people, but encourages more terrorism from those like the kind of person who was deliberately cultivated to blow himself up on my bus that day with the goal of killing and maiming as many innocent people as possible. Where is the investigation by the UN of such barbaric terrorism that is taught in Palestinian schools and encouraged on all levels of society? Where is the UN when the family members of the terrorists receive $25,000 or more as payment for the murderous acts that their family members have carried out? Where else in the world does the pay for slave program exist, and why is nothing being done about it? It is sad that it needs to be said, but it is time for the Human Rights Council to stand up for actual human rights, as opposed to excusing murder and terrorism. Let's send a clear message today to the UN and all good people of the world who truly care about human rights. Darkness will never extinguish the light. Evil will never defeat good. And we will continue to fight back and speak our truth over and over again until somebody hears us.
Thank you, Sari, for telling your story, for giving a voice to victims of terror, for making sure that the innocent victims of human rights are not overlooked here today. To speak further to the hypocrisy and inexcusable omissions of the Commission's report, an expert in military affairs who has explained the dangers of the UNHRC's previous mistreatment of Israel, retired British Army Commander Colonel Richard Kemp.
Thank you. Was this report written in Moscow by the Kremlin? It might as well have been, because Pileg's propaganda, which undoubtedly will be supported by the UN today, is the equivalent of Putin's propaganda that justifies his invasion of Ukraine. This propaganda justifies unprovoked terrorist attacks we've heard about against Israeli civilians and Israeli soldiers. It's equivalent. There is no justification for what's happened. There is no justification for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. There is no justification for Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups' attacks against Israelis. Israelis' defenses, Israelis' lawful defenses, are branded by this report as being illegitimate, as being criminal. At the same time, this report ignores the attacks that are being made against Israel that require this defense. It ignores the suicide bomb attack, wave after wave of suicide bomb attacks, which Israel built a barrier to protect against, and which is criminalized by this report by Navi Pillay. Israel secures the borders with Gaza to prevent terrorists getting in and out, to prevent weapons coming in and out, to prevent attacks from Gaza. And that is criminalized as an illegal occupation of Gaza by Pillay. This report incites violence. These people that wrote this report, and anybody here in this building that supports it today, will have blood on their hands. It endangers Israelis, civilians and soldiers, children, women, men. It endangers Jews around the world by inciting and encouraging and inspiring anti-Semitic attacks. And I think no people are more endangered than the Palestinian Arab civilians who have been betrayed by this report, whose leaders themselves spend the money that they're given by the international community for the good of the Palestinian people, spend it on weapons of war. The report ignores the numerous times that Israel and the international community have made offers of peace which would have given the Palestinians their own state. They ignore this and they call Israel's occupation, Israel's operations in the West Bank and in Gaza, they call it an illegal occupation. I'm not Jewish, ladies and gentlemen, but I will certainly not stand by and do nothing while this body in the building behind me supports what is blatantly racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic hatred churned out by a report authored by 3 people with a track record of hostility to the Jewish state. I demand that the United Nations General Assembly rejects this report.
Thank you, Colonel Kemp. It's my pleasure now to introduce a speaker with a unique perspective on the issue of apartheid as distinguished from the situation in Israel. South African lawyer and board member of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, Olga Meshwe-Washington.
The Independent International Commission of Inquiry of the occupation of Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, is the most glaring example of how the human rights systems at the United Nations have been hijacked to encourage and facilitate anti-Semitism. The Commission's latest report attacks the inherent Jewish nature of the State of Israel and so must be called what it is: an incendiary anti-Zionist contribution to decades-old Soviet Arab propaganda machinery. Whilst not expressly mentioning the word apartheid, the report alludes to systemic racism and the enforcing of apartheid-style laws by Israel. Israel is accused of dispossessing Palestinians of their land, homes, and livelihoods, just like the South African apartheid government did to blacks. Israel is also accused of restricting the movement of Palestinians, forcibly transferring them into South African-style Bantustans, and even conducting arbitrary military raids on innocent civilians. The Commission's report creates an alternate reality of life on the ground and laws in place in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza to weaponize the history of apartheid South Africa against Israel and the Jews. Speaking as a Black South African and representing a people who know firsthand the evils of systemic racism, the existence of a Jewish state is not racist. Israel is not an apartheid state. Shame on the Commission for continuing to appropriate the history of my people and trivializing my family's pain under the banner of human rights. Shame on you for privileging the lies of anti-Semites who seek the destruction of the Jewish people over truth. The Commission imposes intent on Israel to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity because it upholds policies akin to those held by the South African apartheid government. This is troubling for many reasons. It not only makes light the humiliation and injustices endured by Black South Africans who lived through apartheid, it also erases the very real, very lived experience of the brutality of apartheid, a reality that includes millions of Black South Africans fleeing their country and living in exile under fear of persecution purely because of the color of their skin. This is not Israel. My people's history and experience are being used as an anti-Semitic tool to politically, morally, and legally delegitimize Israel with the hope to criminalize her and ultimately destroy her. The Commission makes a mockery of what the UN is mandated to do: enhance international cooperation for the promotion and protection of all human rights. References in the report to systemic racism and the insinuations of apartheid make peace for Israelis and Palestinians unattainable because they create a scapegoat that prevents Hamas and the Palestinian Authority from being held accountable for their mistreatment of the Palestinian people and terrorist attacks against Jewish and non-Jewish Israelis. The report also perverts the truth, and there can be no justice without truth. History has time and time again shown us that anti-Semitism is a harbinger of discrimination and persecution of other groups of people. The rise of anti-Zionism, today's form of anti-Semitism, is a threat to people everywhere. So today's call for the end of the Commission's mandate is not just about Israel. It's about standing in the gap for peoples and nations across the globe. And until that happens, we will not be silent.
Thank you, Olga. Please welcome now a defender and promoter of the rights of the Jewish people, Rabbi Eric J. Greenberg, the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Good morning. My name is Rabbi Eric Greenberg, and I'm here on behalf of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, one of the largest international Jewish human rights organizations in the world, with over 400,000 member families in the United States. We are an accredited NGO at the United Nations and UNESCO. Today, we join with our fellow Jewish organizations and allies to express our grave concerns and help expose the dangerous witch hunt directed against the State of Israel and the Jewish people by the United Nations Human Rights Council and its latest embarrassment. This witch hunt is proof positive of the Human Rights Council's double standards, hypocrisy, and vile prejudice, which is only directed at the State of Israel, even as the Human Rights Council ignores horrific human rights abuses in Iran, China, Russia, and Syria, just to name a few. This Commission of Inquiry is an embarrassment to the United Nations, a body created out of the ashes of the Holocaust. The Pillay Commission has rendered the Human Rights Council irrelevant in fighting serious human rights abuses like those we see this minute against the women of Iran and the people of Ukraine. Importantly, this commission and its 3 anti-Semitic judges is condemned by 22 countries, U.S. State Department, and bipartisan representatives. Today, we call on the United Nations to take whatever steps necessary to disband this witch hunt against Israel. We call on the United States Congress to pass bipartisan legislation calling for the elimination of the Pillay Commission and for the White House to fully support this. And we call on member states of the United Nations to withhold funding of the Human Rights Council until this commission is shut down. Remember, this is not a commission of inquiry. This is a commission of injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Greenberg. Finally, it's my privilege to introduce a faith leader in the Christian community who stands in determination against anti-Semitism and in support of the State of Israel. Founder of Eagle's Wings Ministries and president of the Israel Christian Nexus, Bishop Robert Stearns.
I'm honored to be here today representing tens of millions of Christians in America and hundreds of millions of Christians around the world who stand firmly and resolutely alongside Israel and the Jewish people. We stand in wholehearted support with the people of Israel in their quest for justice and fairness, which is not found in the organization housed behind us. We join today in protest of one of the most notorious and shameless examples of injustice in this generation. The anti-Semitic injustice that runs rampant through the deceptive and accusatory position taken continually by the UN and its so-called Human Rights Council. Israel's history as a people for several thousand years is unmistakably intertwined with the land of Israel itself, including the heartland of Judea and Samaria and her historic and undivided capital, the city of Jerusalem. Yet Israel has faced constant, relentless threats and hostility from rogue nations and members of the international community simply for wanting to live in peace in her homeland, surrounded by her neighbors. Time and time again, the UN has refused to abandon its anti-Israel vitriol. The UN will not listen to facts, no matter how compellingly or thoroughly they are presented to this sham of an international human rights organization. This so-called independent commission of inquiry claims that its purpose is to investigate the facts on the ground. But the truth is, this commission has no interest in facts, but only in demonizing bias against one nation and one people, the state of Israel. In a gross distortion of truth, the Human Rights Council has issued condemnations against Israel more times than it has done so against Iran, North Korea, and Syria combined. Three of the nations most openly known for their blatant human rights violations against women, political opponents, and religious minorities. In contrast, ladies and gentlemen, Israel is the one country in the Middle East where the Christian population has consistently grown. The Arab population has consistently grown. There is enjoyed freedom of the press, freedom of religion. The gay community lives in safety, and teenage girls are not murdered for removing their hijabs. We come here today to advocate for the real truth in a real free world, not the false information spoon-fed by international dictators and their welcome committee at the UN. Israel's cause is just, and we owe it to ourselves, to our children and our grandchildren, and the international community to call the UN to accountability. The injustice and anti-Semitism must end, and it must end now. As we work together towards this future of peace, and we stand together today in hope, I would like to sing the song of hope that is Israel's national anthem, the Hatikva.
עולות בלבב פנימה, נפש יהודי הומייה. ולפתי מזרח קדימה, עין לציון צופיה. עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Thank you, Bishop Stearns, for that message of hope. And I want to thank everyone who's come out today. Thank the media presence here for bringing exposure to the lies, to the bias of the institution known as the Commission of Inquiry on Israel. And I'd like to thank my fellow speakers for exposing the bias, the bigotry. And I also want to encourage those of you who are watching today to share this video. It will be posted on StandWithUs.com. And again, thank you very much. Have a great day.